Welcome to our fourth annual global study on exchanging cyber threat intelligence. There has to be a better way. This is a joint presentation of the Ponemon Institute and Infoblox. My name is Mike Zuckerman. I'm a consulting product marketing manager working for Infoblox, and I'd like to introduce and pass the baton to Dr. Larry Ponemon.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to co-present with you today. And audience, thank you for your interest in our latest and greatest research. Let's go to our next slide, please, and this will tell you who I am and what we do. The name of my company, as you can tell, is Ponemon Institute, not Pokemon Institute, but Ponemon Institute. We were founded about 20 years ago, and we're dedicated to advancing responsible information management that positively affects cybersecurity, privacy, data protection, and a host of different domains, including business organizations and government. We do independent research. We also have a group of folks called the RIM Council, which are information management leaders in companies throughout the world. And we love what we do. And we basically will hopefully continue with the organization for another 100 years or so. Then I'll retire. But for the most part, if you're interested in learning more about Ponemon Institute, give us a call. We'll give you the contact information at the end of the presentation. Let's go to our next slide. Now, I just tell you before we get into do a deeper dive, this research is sponsored by Infoblox, but independently conducted. And Mike Zuckerman is my partner in crime today. He's actually much more interesting than I am. Mike basically will hold you accountable to responding to the tough questions from the audience at the end of the presentation. But for the most part, it's a team taught event. And if you have any questions or concerns, write them down and we'll hopefully get to those. If not at the end of this meeting, at a future event, we'll try to schedule some time to talk with you. So just think about that and noodle on it. And now let's take the plunge and get into the information or research. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is an important, very important slide. It's also a very boring slide, but when you're doing research, you need to present some facts. And the most important fact is our sample size. Is our sample size large enough to justify the statistical analysis that we perform generally? And the answer is yes. Our final sample for this year's study is 1,432 respondents. These are people who are knowledgeable about the IT security function within their organizations. They also have knowledge of leading edge technology and responsible for managing teams of people who do security, cybersecurity, and even privacy related issues. The sample size has grown over the 4 years that we've been doing this study, and a response rate is 3.8%. Before we leave that, a response rate that is about 2% is estimated for expert samples of domain experts. Ours is larger, higher, because we have a larger sampling frame, and also because people find the research interesting, so they stick to it. They don't give up in the middle of the process of doing the survey. So very good response rate. We're very proud of the results that we have here, and they're generally consistent with other Ponemon studies. Let's go to our next slide.
Well, one quick comment, please.
Sure.
This data is really quite interesting when viewed regionally.
Right.
And we've decided to work with the Ponemon team to sponsor breakout reports for EMEA and Asia Pacific. They'll be available over the next few months, but just so everybody in the audience knows, if you're in EMEA or Asia Pacific, where many of our attendees are, we're going to have breakout reports for you. Thank you.
Very cool. And a breakout report is important because we do have differences across regions and countries within regions. So keeping that in mind, it's really important to provide facts about these regional differences. So if you're interested, hopefully you are, we'll share a copy of that latest and greatest research when completed. Let's go to our next slide, please. Okay, a pie chart. We can move through these pretty quickly. For our current study, our sample size of 1,432 active respondents. We range in size from senior executive to contractor and staff level. Some of the results we get are actually better if they're responded to by people who are in the trenches, the staff and rank and file employee. In some cases, the response is affected by the very senior level people like senior executives, C-level executives, CISOs, and so forth. So we have a mixture of those things. The largest slice of the pie, as you can see, at 36%, is that supervisor and technician category. We'll talk more about this later. Next slide. Okay, what department or function that best describes where respondents are physically located or spiritually located or virtually located? Well, corporate IT is the largest slice of the pie. It's almost half at 47%. Then lines of business, security, risk management, general management, legal and compliance, finance and accounting, and that is a mouthful. But clearly the largest sector is the corporate IT sector, but it's a diverse sampling frame, which is very important to the study. Let's go to our next slide. Primary industry, we cover a whole bunch of industries. That's good news because it's interesting to see industry differences if they exist. The bad news with this slide is some of the slices to the proverbial pie are too small to do carve-outs by industry. So financial service, which at 15%, no problem, no problemento. We can get that sliced out of the pie. 13% for services, public sector, 11%. And then when you fall below 10%, sample size may be too small. But remember, we start off with a very large sample of 1,432 active respondents. Next slide. Okay, in terms of the size of the organizations that participate in the study, approximately how large are these organizations? We measure that in headcount. From more than 75,000, some organizations are nearly 1 million people large, so that's a huge organization, to less than 250. We do this deliberately because we hypothesize differences based on organizational size. And small to medium-sized organizations may be very different, and I think they are in many cases, to enterprise-sized organizations. That's why we do this analysis. Next slide, please. Navit, you're doing a great job on the slides. Thank you. Location, where are employees located in our study? Remember, it's a US only study, but people could work for companies like a Siemens, a General Electric, and so on that operate in different parts of the world. So the largest segment is Europe, US, Canada, Asia Pacific, Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. And these will be used in our next version of the analysis by region. So you will see some interesting results, I believe, when we have that data to share with you. Next slide. So now it's time for the drum roll. Key findings. And again, Mike, at any point in time, feel free to chime in.
For sure.
Next slide, please. Is your organization consuming and exchanging more threat intelligence? And significantly increasing and decreasing is what we see here in a percentage basis. We're looking at 3 of the 4 reporting years from 2015, 2017, and 2021, which is our current result. And you'll see that the numbers are increasing in terms of intelligence data consumed from 48% to 62%, and on intelligence data exchange from 40% to 55%. Now, how significant are these differences? Boy, oh, Bob, they are very different. And basically, how do I know that? If you run a statistical analysis on this data set, the margin of error is about 4%. It's actually less than 4%. So any percentage that difference that's greater than 4% is statistically significant at the 95% level of confidence.
Yeah. So what's really interesting about this is that, threat intelligence consumption continues to increase. And it's for the reasons that most of us in the audience know, right? This data is essential to SOC and IT teams and NOC and blue teams and everybody else to prioritize their activities. You can't fight 100 theoretical attackers, but you can fight 2 or 3 that have a high probability of showing up on your home front. So in the final analysis, threat intelligence, stands tall in helping with risk reduction and breach avoidance. And you'll see a lot more data to that effect as we continue.
Great comment. Thank you, sir. Okay, next slide. Now this is a quite a slide. There's lots of data points here, even though it's written in sentence format. But I'd like to ask you, Mike, if you don't mind, is kind of pick out a couple, maybe 3 or 4 of these, and that you think are most important. These are 11 trends.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think, too, that free sources still remain part of the mix. Let's be clear, people use free sources, right, but they have less confidence in it for sure. 4, I think, and you'll see this again, is, prioritization of, what's important and what isn't. And maybe more important, at least to me, is timely delivery. You've got to get it, and the lifetime of that data is short. Number 8 is also really interesting, that Some organizations have moved heaven and earth to set up full-blown threat intelligence platforms. They take a lot of work and maintenance and support, and they give you a lot of capabilities, but there's room for battlefield tactical tools, things you can use that are fast and lightweight. We have a product, Dossier, that's kind of a lightweight tool for automating collection and correlation of threat intelligence from dozens of sources, without solving the world's problems in 2 weeks, right? Just to set these things up. Dossier is lightweight, you get it set up and you start integrating the feed. And so I think that's another one. And finally, the last one, automated processes. Attackers are going automated. We have to go automated. Everything about from the moment a threat shows up to the way it's disseminated, it's made actionable, it's prioritized, ultimately should tie to automation. And that's another trend that's been picking up steam.
Very cool. Thank you. Next slide, please. Another drum roll, or a new section, trends in the exchange of threat intelligence. Next slide, please. Oh boy, look at all this data, all these data points. This is good. So how are you involved in your company's cyber threat intelligence activities or process? And they could respond more than one of these choices. And the number one, as you can see, the longest bar is user of threat intelligence, followed by the analyzer of threat intelligence, followed by the gatherer of threat intelligence, followed by executive and manager in charge of threat intelligence. And you'll notice that there are differences between these segments, but you can be in obviously more than one segment at a time. Also, if you look really close, you'll notice that the numbers from 2014 are steadily increasing to 2021. Back in the user of threat intelligence was 78% back in 2014. And now in 2021, it basically is 77%. And is it statistically significant? The answer is yes, at the 95% level of confidence. Again, using that margin of error of about 4%. Do you have any comments on this slide, Mike?
No, sir. This is good.
Okay. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, it looks like a similar pattern. Reasons for full participation in a program for exchanging threat intelligence, which by the way is 36% of our total sample. And number one reason, improves the security posture of my organization. If that wasn't number one or two, I'd sell my house and move to New Zealand because it just is it's obvious that it should be. Improve the security, and New Zealand, by the way, is a great place, not to pick on any one country. Improve the security posture of the national critical infrastructure, improve situational awareness, foster collaboration among peers and industry groups, reduces the cost of detecting and preventing cyber attacks, make threat data more actionable, enhances the timeliness of threats data. You notice that it's in a descending order. Also, if you look at the results, you have to look real hard. The pattern that we had before where we moved from 2014 to 2021, it seemed the numbers increased. That's not true in all of these, but some of these, the increase is statistically significant. Okay, Mike, any comments, or would you like to move on?
Please move on.
Okay, we will move to the next slide, please. Okay, another killer slide. What's the reason for now in the category of not fully participating, but partially participating in the exchange of threat intelligence? And that's 47% of sample. And the number one reason for partial, not full involvement is the infamous lack of resource, potential liability of sharing, lack of trust in the source of intelligence, slow manual sharing process, anti-competitive concerns, no perceived benefit to my organization, lack of incentives, and then cost. And that's kind of interesting because in studies that we did way back when we started the company like 20 years ago, we basically would do a study and we have a variable called cost or income or something about dollars and cents, monetary value and so on. And this normally was like the number one or number two in all of our research. And over time, the cost factor has been going down. It's less important. What is more important is things like speed, processing, flexibility, availability, interoperability, and so on. Let's go to our next slide. Reasons for now not participating in threat intelligence. This is the smallest subgroup at 17% of respondents. The number one, partial liability of sharing, no perceived benefit to my organization, lack of trust in the sources of intelligence. That's a big one. Lack of resources, slow manual sharing process, anti-competitive concerns, cost, which move from last place to second to last place, and then lack of incentives. So the patterns are generally consistent over from whether you're a full participant to a partial participant to a not participating. Okay, let's go to our next slide. How are threats investigated? More than one response is permitted, using automated processes, using manual processes, hybrid or manual and automated process, using machine learning and artificial intelligence tools, and then others, very small percent at 4%. Mike?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, automation's the big thing. Machine learning and AI drive it. And, the trend here is, we feel the need for speed, right? Automation is the only way to keep up with the attackers and where they're headed in leveraging the data that they get. They're building automation tools to move faster. So we need to do the same.
Absolutely right. Let's go to our next slide. Section change, yay. Trends in the management of threat intelligence activities. And go to our next slide. We have an interesting graph to share with you. How satisfied are you in the way your organization is able to obtain threat intelligence? The way the scale works very simply from very satisfied on the left side to not satisfied on the right side. But you notice that the net satisfied is going down. In other words, you're becoming more satisfied over time, but there's still gaps, as you can see. Any comments on this slide that you'd like to add?
No, this is good.
Okay, next slide. Now, these, admittedly, this is small print. It's hard to read. Why is your organization only somewhat or not satisfied at all? 60% of respondents fall into this category. The number one reason, information is not timely. Information does not provide context to make it actionable, not actionable. Information is too complicated. Information is not categorized according to threat type or attacker. Too complex to apply existing infrastructure. Requires manual process and so on and so on. Not to read everything here, but there are lots of reasons for not being satisfied. And obviously there's room for improvement in everything in the security domain. And this is one of those that we want to have more actionable, higher quality results.
Yeah, I think the message here is that timeliness is everything. It needs to be delivered quickly, consumed, and utilized. The lack of context is about usability, right? And our CIU thinks a lot about providing context and explanation around IOCs. The goal is make these things immediately useful and immediately actionable and consume them as fast as possible to stay ahead of the attacker. Sometimes we'll spot a new domain that was spun up 28 minutes ago, and the lifetime of that threat may only be a few hours, but you need to know it's out there, right? Those are the kinds of things that you need to know.
Very cool. Next slide. Okay. Why does your organization pay for threat intelligence? 71% say mostly pay or a combination of paid and free sources. So that's 71%. And there are multiple reasons. Do you want to take this slide, Mike?
Well, yeah, I think the issue is the quality of paid sources is generally consistent and better. I'm not knocking. There's a lot of great independent threat researchers that will put, their information on the wire when it's out there, right? So I think best practice today is, while there's a big increase in paid sources, best practice is still to utilize free sources and keep tabs on them, because the best source you may get may be the other bank, down the way, or a threat researcher who stumbles into something and publishes it. And so you really got to keep, your fingers in all the pies. But in general, the paid intelligence is better curated, better collected, and there's a major effort to move it out in a timely way.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. So let's go to our next slide. Okay, here we go. Now we're doing a different type of scale. It's a 10-point scale, from 1 meaning low effectiveness to 10 being high effectiveness. So the mean, median, and mode is 5.5%. If you're above that, you're trending to positive. If you're below it, you're trending to negative. And what we see as a percentage is the high response, which is a 7, 8, 9 response. Excuse me, 7, 8, 9, or 10 response. And if you kind of look at it, how accurate is the intelligence received by your organization? 48% current year. Look at that. Huge increase from the prior year. How timely is the intelligence received by your organization? Again, 29% versus 21%. That's statistically significant. And then finally, how actionable is the intelligence received by the organization? Again, big difference in 2021. Do you have
Yeah.
it there? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's what we talked about, right? Utility is measured really across the board for accuracy, timeliness, and ability to be actionable is going up. So amen for that. But this says that, these are huge changes and positive for the industry.
Exactly. Next slide, please. Okay, if your organization uses threat indicators, what information is most valuable? And this is 85% of respondents say that yes, they use threat indicators in the normal course of business. And more than one response is permitted. A whole bunch of results here that we can do a deeper dive on, but I'll just carry a few. Malicious IP address, followed by malicious URL, followed by malicious domain, and then there are others. And let me turn it to you, Mike, for color comment.
Yeah, I think, the high level takeaway is that IPs, URL domains, those are the first places that anything has to go, whether it's, a bad URL in an email or an embedded attachment. Most of the time, malware or the attacker tools reach out and try to find an IP, and they go through DNS. And this is why tools like DNS security are so important to you, because they need to get to an IP. They need to use this bad URL maybe to hand you off someplace else. They've spun up a malicious domain only 28 minutes ago. And so DNS security is one of those controls that will help you attack clearly, the tip of the spear here, the first 3 lines of this chart. And so that's a really important thing to remember.
Excellent, thank you. Let's go to our next slide. Okay, what statement best describes how threat intelligence is managed within your organization? Again, only one response permitted. And the two top choices are centralized control by a dedicated team versus centralized control within IT. Color commentary on this, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the need for a dedicated team is just going up, right? Because there's stuff to vet. And if you're a major financial firm or mid-sized financial firm, or you work in manufacturing, you know that this is a cost of business, and you're standing up the team to do this. And whether they're in the SOC or cybersecurity or IT, or sometimes even in the NOC, it doesn't matter. You need resources on this stuff because it's one of your best ways to avoid what might be a catastrophic data breach.
Excellent. Next slide, please. Okay, does your organization consolidate threat intelligence data from multiple sources? And we see in terms of yes response, we basically are overwhelming yes. Yes, we consolidate. Yes, we have plans to consolidate. And no, we do not consolidate. And that's only 29 and 30% in 2021. Any comments on this slide? Because I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think the notion of automation, correlation, consolidation, it's really the fact that some companies have deployed big threat intelligence platforms, to get these things all linked together. There are powerful, lightweight kind of battlefield tools like our Dossier product that allow you to do this integration. But, consolidation just makes your life a lot easier. You don't want to sit there looking at 5 feeds yourself. So this is really where the market's going.
Great. Well, thank you. Next slide. Why does your organization consolidate threat intelligence data from multiple sources? Again, this is 44% of respondents say they consolidate. And you can see the reasons vary from we want intelligence data specific to the size of our organization, followed by we want intelligence data specified to our industry, then geography, and then we do not want to rely upon only one solution. Comments on this slide, sir?
Yeah, it's about all these things, right? I mean, it's about size, industry, and geography. You can't address, let's make it more real here for this group, right? You can't address every risk in the world. It's like the first time I looked at MITRE ATT&CK, I said, how do we block all this stuff, right? And the answer is you've got to pick the targets of opportunity that are most threatening to you, your geo, your industry, that month, where you are in the world, right? And that's the only way you can prioritize and reduce risk. Otherwise, it can be overpowering for you.
I agree. Next slide. What describes your organization's role in exchanging threat intelligence? We receive and provide in nearly equal proportion. We mostly receive intelligence data. We mostly provide intelligence data. We verify threat intelligence. So we kind of got a kind of an interesting collection of results. Let's move to our next slide. Does your organization have a role in verifying the quality of threat intelligence sent or received? And the answer is yes. In threat intelligence we receive. Yes, in threat intelligence we provide and receive. Yes, in threat intelligence we provide. And then a small percentage, only 10%, is in the no category this year. Any comments on this slide, Mike?
Yeah, quality remains important, and many stakeholders take the time to verify it. Quality is about, you'll see later, the ROI side of the equation. Good intel stops data breaches, bad intel wastes valuable SOC, blue team, IT, and knock time. And even the compliance people get stirred up when something bad comes over the wall and they start worrying about it. And if the intel is not good, you're wasting a lot of resources. So there's real ROI there.
Very cool. Next slide, please. What are the main sources of threat intelligence received by your organization? And we have our number one response is peer and other companies, then open source, then industry associations, law enforcement, government officials, and other very small percentages. And not too much difference in the peer and other companies. It's hovering at 58 or 57%. So any comments on this slide, or should we move on to the next?
No, this is good. Thank you.
Great. Next slide. Look at all this stuff here. What best describes how threat intelligence is being used and disseminated in the network? And we have a whole bunch of choices here. And many of these we know well, like alerts and IDS, web portal, DLP, SIEM, IPS, SOAR, NGF, next generation firewall, traditional, TIP, threat intel platform, UTM, WAF, DNZ, RPZ, SEG, SWG, and other. That is a mouthful. Any comments on the slide?
Yeah, well, clearly you share these bad domains and IPs, right? That's what you want to do. You want to share the indicators that you have so these devices can automate. But the first stop really is you've got your DNS security, right? Before anyone goes to look up a domain or do anything, you can stop over 50% of the mal traffic before you put the load on more expensive security controls, right? The speed that comes out of using DNS and leveraging that as a first point of departure, will stop over 50% of this stuff. So you have a lot of security controls to work with, and sharing the data is an important part of getting the value out of, the effort you've put in for it.
Thank you. Good response. Good color commentary. Next slide. What information is contained in threat intelligence reports? More than one response is permitted. And threat indicators such as suspicious host names, IP addresses, files, hashes, and more. Software vulnerability patch updates, incident response information, tactics, techniques, and procedure reports, and then finally results of cybercrime investigations and prosecutions. Then you get to the other, it's just a trace at 3%.
Well, I would note, right, there's a subtlety here, but don't miss it. Tactics, technique, and procedure reports. There's a big jump. You know what that is about? That's MITRE ATT&CK, right? That is the MITRE ATT&CK framework formula to describe an attacker from the attacker point of view. And TTPs are really important because they help you predict their next moves, so you can get in the middle of their kill chain and break it. So tactics, their goal, techniques, how they're going to do that, and procedures, the nitty-gritty of execution. Many of the platforms out there that do threat intelligence or lightweight products that go for speed are looking at ways to better leverage MITRE ATT&CK data. So that one is a personal interest to me, and I think it's worth looking into, understanding more about MITRE ATT&CK.
Great. By the way, Mike, we have a fellows community. These are distinguished people in the IT security profession, and I'd like to recruit you to be a member of our fellows community.
Yeah, I feel like we're Howard Cosell and his partner covering the Muhammad Ali fight.
I like that. They were the best. Okay, let's go to our next slide. How is threat intelligence received by their organization? More than one response permitted. Data feed from external sources, internal collection and analysis, threat advisories, exchange of threat intelligence with other companies, sticks, taxi, API to a cloud-based service, and then text files. Any comments here, sir?
Yeah, this is, we're back here. This is the need for speed, followed by the need for automation. Everything to me is about, there's a lot of data, right? Below, there's more exchange, there's less exchange. Stix taxi is less in use, but data feeds from external sources, cranking that up and leveraging it. That's where the action is to drive, to defend the organization. It's about that need for speed and pulling that stuff in as quick as you can.
I agree. Next slide. What is the one best way to exchange threat intelligence? So again, it has to sum to 100% for each of the years, which it does. And the number one, well, it's actually interesting because it looks like the largest bar, horizontal, is when a trusted intermediary that shares with other organizations. But it's very top of the list with the threat intelligence exchange service and with an industry organization that distributes to others, then neutral commercial third party. Then you could read the rest. Any comments on this?
No, this is good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide. Why is collaboration and exchanging threat intelligence with other organizations not effective? According to 60% of the respondents. We have a whole bunch of reasons here. I'll just talk about a few. Silos among IT department and lines of business, concerns about trust, insufficient resources, lack of technologies, tools, or automation, concerns about threat information becoming public, lack of leadership in overseeing collaboration, concerns about regulations, concerns about liability, concerns about risk, and then other is only 2%. Okay. What do you think, Mike? Any comments?
Yeah, people just aren't sharing data, and silos among IT departments and line of business has to do with operating procedures and has to do rarely, but unfortunately with organizational politics. This is my gold. I don't know if I should let it out. And those are, trends that work against being successful. And so those things have to be broken down in organizations.
Yeah, agreed. Next slide. Effectiveness of organization cyber defense and processes for using threat intelligence from internal and external sources of 10-point scale, as I mentioned before. So we're looking at 7+ to 1 to 7, 8, 9, or 10 response. And number one is effectiveness of defense against cyber attacks. Then effectiveness of the process of using actionable intelligence from external sources to predict malicious activities. And then third on the list is effectiveness of process for using actionable intelligence from internal sources to predict malicious activities.
Yeah, threat intelligence is working and people are leveraging it. And the jump to 47%, the jumps here are statistically wonderful as a testimonial to the great work that the users in the audience are doing with their threat intelligence data. It's making a big impact and they're seeing it.
Super. Next graph. This is a weird looking graph here, but it's very interesting. When does threat intelligence become stale or it's not fresh anymore? And then within seconds, the number one response within minutes, within hours, look at it tones down to within days, within weeks, within months. So in other words, it's almost real time.
It really is going real time. And the big takeaway, this is like the big takeaway. You sat through a lot of the detail here and now boom, right? Within minutes, you've got to have your feeds tied into what you do. You've got to make it actionable and alertable. You've got to distribute it within your infrastructure. You get your DNS security. You've got to make sure that you can react to it because attackers are smart enough to know that there's a list of bad URLs, but if I create one and push this spam out and try to make this actionable within a few hours, I can get away with it. And the defenders are learning that, no, you're not. You're not going to get away with that. We're going to stop you because we're going to be on top of this stuff. So, timeliness is critical and automation is essential to make it work.
Great, thank you. Next slide. Another funny looking slide here. How frequently does your organization receive threat intelligence? And we've seen the number one response is weekly and followed by other or irregular intervals. And then it's all approximately the same hourly, bi-weekly, monthly. Any comment here?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of data. So Ponemon does something we really like, which is they reach out across the depth and breadth of enterprise, right? But make no mistake, the big guys are going real time, and big guys, right? Major banks, even the private client banking, the hedge funds, these guys, they have armies set up in there to stay on alert 24/7. So you got a little bifurcation in the data here. But if you're a big target like finance, you're going to have real-time defense. And why is finance a big target? Because that's where the money is, right? That's where they can embezzle who knows how many millions by attacking wire transfer or getting the ATM machines to spit out money. So the big guys who are very vulnerable, and you know who you are, right? They're all over, frequency, automation, and speed of distribution for alert data.
Very cool. Next slide. There's a ton of information here. This is great, good stuff. But I'm somewhat biased, Mike. Since we did the
this is great. That's why we sponsor this every few years.
And next slide. Okay, what metrics do you use to evaluate the quality of the threat intelligence provider and the information received? And we have a whole bunch of choices here, but ability to prioritize threat intelligence, followed by timely delivery of threat intelligence, followed by ability to implement the intelligence, followed by the minimum number of false positives, and many other choices here. Any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, prioritize what's at risk to me right now in my industry and my geography. Timely delivery. Make sure I know this stuff like right away and make sure it's actionable, right? I need that data to flow right into my DNS security. Can you do that for me? And the answer, certainly for Infoblox, is a big yes, right? But these kinds of things up front, priority, delivery, implementation, those are the things that will make the difference potentially between a data breach that costs you millions of dollars and harms the organization and maybe dodging it, right? There's no 100%, but reducing risk and dodging it would be a wonderful thing when it happens.
Great. Next slide. Do you take the following into account when calculating a risk score? And we have a whole bunch of things here. The number one is it actionable, followed by confidence in the source and veracity of the threat indicator, followed by technical impact, which would be loss of confidentiality, integrity, availability, and accountability, and then confidence, reported by multiple sources, and the list continues. Any comments on this slide?
No, this is excellent.
Good. Okay. I like to hear the word excellent. Thank you. Next slide. What are indicators of risk? More than one response is permitted. That means it doesn't sum to 100%. It's more than that. Overall decline in the quality of the provider services. Notice that that's increasing from 62% to 67%, which is statistically significant. Uncertainty about the accuracy of threat intelligence. Poor decisions because of accuracy of the intelligence. Poor decisions because of a lack of trustworthiness. Turnover of the vendor's key personnel, which is important, very important. Discovery that the provider is using a subcontractor that has access to the company's information, perhaps without permission, and then poor decisions because of complications.
Yeah, this is excellent. Quality and accuracy need to be on the tip of your spear, right? And if you don't have that, then you're making bad decisions and you're missing a potential breach.
Exactly. Okay, next slide. This is a good one for you, Mike. ROI, how is ROI measured?
Mamma mia. Well, so let's, for those of you that are familiar with SANS, you know that they've published some calculations years ago for calculating the return on investment for security, return on security investments, which is very useful. But let's step back another 10 feet. I mean, I know this audience, right? Most of you, if you're arms deep in threat intelligence, you're watching this webinar, you're in the middle of a war zone, right? Most of the people, in IT or the SOC or the red team or the blue team or the purple team, or even in compliance, right? You sit at the staff table with your peers and you say, how's the accounting department doing? They say, fine. How's the sales department doing? Well, how are you guys doing? We're getting hammered. It's a war zone. Every day of your job is like, what's that movie called? Fight Club, right? You're being dragged into a battle with malicious criminal attackers, some of whom are nation states. So you're facing off against 1,000 people in a bunker someplace, who knows where, and they're trying to put you out of business, break your enterprise, steal your enterprise money. It's not a normal job, and it's something much more than an adventure. And the problem is that these attackers are forcing you into a battle all the time, right? Because you're in react mode. And Sun Tzu, whom I like to quote now and again, don't go into a battle you can't win. And I think my takeaway on ROI here is, for me, that there are essential things you need, right, to go into the battle and win, right? You need threat intelligence. You need intelligence on your enemy. You can't fight an enemy unless you know where they are, what they're doing, where they're coming from. And, that intelligence is out there, and you need tools that aggregate it and move it quickly through your organization. And then you need security controls like DNS that enable you to triage a huge percent of it and get it away from your organization quickly. And so that way, when you have those tools, you go into a battle where you can win, right? Where you can prevail. But right now, if you don't do those things, your attacker is setting you up, pulling you in, and controlling the engagement. And by getting good threat intelligence in your hands, you've got control of the battle, and that's what it takes to win. So to me, that's the real ROI in the equation.
Love the response. That's great. The art of war. That's very cool. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Is called the warning label. And now
Right.
we absolutely love what we do, and we take very important steps to maintain a level of quality and reliability in the results. So this is the good stuff. But all survey research generally is subject to a non-response bias, which means that the people doing this survey are different than the people who decided not to. And that's just the nature of the world. And if we find that it exists, there are adjustments we can make to the final data. The second category is sampling frame. Is it representative? And the answer is it should be, but if it isn't, that's another bias that we have to manage. And then my favorite is the self-reported results. So a human being, we are emotional animals. And what happens is if we feel good, the sun shining, we're in a beautiful place like where you live, like in Arizona, we will have a Ponemon survey and everything is strongly agree, everything's good, everything's cool. And then on a day where I'm in Michigan now, it might be snowing in the middle of summer, our rating could be very different. And we don't know that the large numbers will net this to zero, but it is a form of bias that has to be dealt with. And let's go to our next slide. Hey, questions.
Yeah, I think we'll pass the baton to Navneet Sood, our moderator, and she'll handle questions for us.
Awesome. Well, great presentation on the research from Dr. Ponemon and insightful comments from you, Mike. So this was a great presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. We're coming at about 45 minutes, so I think we can take a few questions. So the first question is, what are the barriers to having more timely intelligence?
Mike, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, I think as Dr. P, showed us statistically earlier, one of the key issues for us is to have automation in place, right? So if you're getting all these feeds manually and they're not aggregated with either a tip or a lightweight battle tool like a dossier, you're just unable to process things quick enough. And remember, the life of that intelligence can be minutes, right? Someone spins up an evil domain and uses it with an email campaign, and they're only trying to strike in the first 2 hours, right? And so those are the things that really count. Dr. P, any other comments?
Sure. Some of the comments actually you made during the presentation are perfect for this question. The barrier to having more timely intelligence, sometimes it's the human factor, right? It's not just the lack of technology or artificial intelligence and all that good stuff, which is important, but sometimes it's just not having the right people or people who are in an organization silo. And then we talked about the silo. These are barriers that actually prevent an organization from achieving a strong security posture. But I definitely think that if an organization can overcome some of these organizational impediments, it could have a very positive effect on the quality of the intelligence gathered, as well as the speed to which the information is used.
Excellent.
All right. Okay. Another question that came in, it's asked, what skills are necessary to managing an effective threat intelligence program?
Well, I'll dive in, Dr. P. Clearly, if you think about the team that really does this, is the people that manage threat intelligence have a broad perspective for the battlefield. So they really, if you looked at MITRE ATT&CK, right, which is kind of the taxonomy of all the evil that could be done to us, right? They kind of know their way around everything. They know pretty much every kind of attack there is, and they use this knowledge with what I think I usually see as deep analytical skills to make important decisions. The decisions about how do I build a taxonomy for what I want to see? How do I categorize, right? So here's my geo, here's my industry. What are the sources I'm going to tap into? What are the tools I'm going to use to increase speed and automation? And so, you're going to need the experience and the analytical skills to make the right decisions. And these decisions are on the edge almost of a life and death decision, because if you're 2 inches to the right and you miss something, that one breach can bring the company down. If you're 2 inches to the left and you're munging too much data, it's going to waste resources and slow you down. So the people on the threat intelligence team are from among the very best, in your cyber defense organizations.
I'll ditto everything you said. It's so important for an organization to have some structure in place as well, and not just trying to invent something, from a zero plate to a full plate. The idea is a lot of the best programs, you can gather information without necessarily revealing top secret issues. And I think if organizations collaborate more with them and their peers, they could be much more likely to have an effective threat intelligence program. The other issue is the word program. We know that a lot of programs are ad hoc. They're not really structured as a program. They're like a collection of activities that could vary based on the whim of your CEO. To make a program work, you need to have policies and procedures in place, as well as technologies, and the human factor, once again, is really important. And also a commitment, meaning the funding, that you really can't have security at a high level, at any level, without funding. It's not like quality is free. Security is not free. It could be very costly. And we need to factor that into the equation as well.
Great. Okay, so I'm just looking at the time. I think we'll have time for one more question. So the next question is, what technologies are most supportive of having an effective threat intelligence sharing program?
Like, that has your name all over it.
Yeah, well, for sure, you're going to have a hard time sharing if you can't aggregate just the data you have on your end, right? You've got to be able to do that. And whether you have a threat intelligence platform or you have a lightweight kind of a battlefield tool like a dossier that just simply aggregates this stuff, you need to be able to do that. And then, what we talked about before, which is how do you take a feed which may be bigger than you need and segment it and categorize it and break it down to fit what's most likely to impact you, right? Automation is also part of, your initiative in doing that. And, I think anything that can be automated must be, because the need for speed is overpowering. Attackers are moving. You remember that list of things, right? Malicious domains, bad IP addresses. They're coming up with stuff right before an email goes out, registering domains that didn't exist. They're not going to be on any list. And you have to have, things like, the right technologies in place to see this in the lifetime of that threat. And all of those things will get the data that you need so that, your intelligence sharing program will benefit your organization, and you'll receive the benefit from your peers and allies in the industry that you also choose to share with.
Okay, awesome. Great. All right, I think we'll stop our questions at this point. And if we did not get you to your questions, we'll answer them offline, and we'll send you guys an email with the answers. So just wanted to remind all our attendees that this webinar, it was recorded. So you all will get a replay of the presentation in a follow-up email along with a link to download this report so you guys can revisit all the great figures and charts that Dr. Ponemon talked about in this presentation. I would like to thank everyone for attending and thank you for your time. And I would especially like to thank Dr. Ponemon for his participation, and also thank Mike Zuckerman for his insightful commentary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, have a wonderful time.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.